Welcome. Welcome to Building a Secure Enterprise with SaltStack SecOps. We'll be starting when Alex joins at about a quarter after. We'll be kicking off here in about 5 minutes. So thanks for hanging tight.
Hey, Ryan, can you hear me?
I can. I'm here.
Okay.
Looks like we have 3 or 4 people on so far. Well, actually, it's showing 8, so that's good.
All right. I'm going to go off camera and mute until start time.
Okay, sounds good. I can't wait to introduce you, Alex. For joining. We'll be starting in just 2 or 3 minutes. Hang tight. All right. Well, it is a quarter after, and I'm ready to introduce Alex Peay. So I've got a little bit of a formal and an informal introduction. The formal introduction goes like this. Alex is the director of SaltStack products at VMware. Prior to the recent acquisition, Alex had worked at SaltStack for 4 years, holding executive leadership positions for engineering, product, and marketing. And he's been building software for over 20 years, working at a variety of companies ranging from small startups to IBM. Throughout his career, he's always worked to develop software that enables users to simplify their lives through the use of technology. And this drive for simplicity included launching one of the first SaaS products at IBM, including cloud-based software to democratize data at Domo, build the first fully automated SecOps solution with SaltStack Enterprise, and now to deliver the power of SaltStack to the VMware portfolio. And the informal introduction is Alex has been my boss for the last year, and it's been fantastic working with him. And I'm sure there'll be a lot to gain here, a lot of respect for Alex, what he's done with SaltStack, and now what he'll be doing with SaltStack at VMware. So I'll turn it over to you, Alex. I'm going to cut my video and probably drop out so you can have more real estate on your screen. And I'll jump back on for the Q&A at the end, if that's okay.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah.
So looking at the session numbers, there's 20 of us. Maybe we just go to everybody turn their camera on. We do a roundtable here. Just kidding. I'm not even sure if the system would support that. But as in the other sessions, if you've got questions, pop them into the chat as I go along. I'll answer questions, or if nothing else, we can collate them and bring them all up at the end. But more than anything, I want to make sure that we're able to kind of talk through what SaltStack SecOps is, how it's evolved over the years, and why we, from a SaltStack and VMware perspective, see such a big future here for SaltStack SecOps, both as kind of its previous iteration, as well as what it can do as we move forward into the future with VMware. One thing I will just say out from the outset, I know you hear product managers, so you're going to come in with a lot of questions about roadmap, about futures, and we'll welcome those, and we'll take those in, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. The one thing I have been reminding people over the last few days is keep in mind we're like 14, 15 days post acquisition here, so there's a lot of discussions going on about longer term roadmap decisions and questions. And we're going through those and working through those. And as those become more hardened, we'll definitely be putting that information out in a variety of channels. And so if you don't get the answer you're looking for today, please, don't get frustrated. Understand that this is a process that we're going through in this acquisition time. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start the sure I got the right settings here. Go ahead and share my screen. I think this will go into a great inception thing for a second as I share my screen, and then we'll jump over. So I'm now sharing a presentation. Ryan, are you able to confirm that you're seeing that presentation? I'm watching on Slack in case you're on mute. So I will assume that you're seeing it. Well, let me see something really quick. I'm going to change something up here. Now I should be able to see. All right. So today, like I said, we want to talk a little bit about SecOps with SaltStack. One of the things that I always like to do is set the stage and talk through a little bit about kind of why SaltStack moved into SecOps, why we see this as a priority. And one of the things that we get pretty often that's always worth mentioning is that just because we use the term SecOps and it's partially security, it doesn't take out the fact that this is really an operations task, right? At the end of this, it always comes back to the operations team getting a few requests. The first one of those are they have to keep everything, or the new request seems to be they have to keep everything secure and compliant. At one time it was all about moving fast. It was about getting the systems up, make sure that they were running all the time. But now what they're hearing more and more often is, hey, everything we do has to be secure, and everything we do has to be compliant with a certain set of baseline standards, right? And that just gets added on to the previous requests of don't slow the systems down, the site's got to be responsive, the infrastructure has to do everything it's expected to, and of course, you could never break anything. And so from an operations standpoint, these are kind of the three legs of the stool that you've been seeing more and more often. And what's become more and more of a reality is you can't overbalance to one of them, right? It used to be enough never to have any downtime, but now it's not enough to not have downtime if, of course, something is exploitable. And so this becomes a bigger and bigger issue for these IT operations users. Now, if we look at the power of SaltStack, we've always talked about this in kind of this 5-pillar notion, right? And some of these are day 0 tasks, and some of these are what we look at as day end tasks. And of course, there's a set of these that are all about provisioning, right? So how do we provision out the images? How do we get them up and configured? How do we deploy the software then that goes on top of those? And those have kind of been that initial configuration standpoint. And as we look forward into a future with VMware, there's certain products from VMware that do some of these pillars better than us. And then there's stuff like deploy where we become just a great opportunity to fill what has been a weakness in that portfolio, but now can take the power of Salt to deploy that software, configure that software in an amazing scale and speed. Now, when we start to talk about SecOps, this is where we really start to look at these day-end use cases. And so the first one, of course, is how do we manage that, right? There's problems with config drift. There's problems with always dealing with repetitive tasks. How do you repair something that's been broken? And of course, with SaltStack's event-driven automation, that's something that you can create beacons and reactors and trigger the ability to check the state of something. And if something's not the way you expect it to, of course, roll back to it. And that led us to this next use case. As we started to talk to more and more of our IT administrators, more and more of our operations teams, they said, hey, we're getting just this avalanche of security alerts, right? Our security team comes in and says, hey, we did a Nessus scan. Here's all the things that need to get fixed. And of course, no sooner had they started on that list that they then get a request that says, hey, we've got this coming in from our federal team. We have to be STIGs compliant. Can you guys go ahead and scan that? And it just became an unattainable goal to get all these things done if you weren't able to automate that. And what we found was that a lot of companies or tools and vendors out there were giving these insights, giving these alerts, giving the operations teams more things to work on, but they were failing to give automation, which just meant that your task list got more and more unwieldy. So of course, SaltStack comes to the playing field, if you will, and these are the benefits we draw on these various areas. And of course, like I said before, we could talk provision, configure, deploy, but today we're going to focus in on secure. Right, and this is all about pre-built compliance standard scanning. This is all about enforcement of those compliances. Those compliance baselines, and ensuring that we're able to remediate the items that come up in an automated fashion instead of just adding to the task list that our operations teams have to deal with. And so as we drill into that, let me take us back to earlier this spring, and of course that feels so long ago for us, but. In that March-April timeframe, SaltStack actually commissioned a survey to operations and security teams where we were just trying to get an understanding of what the biggest pain points were, right? Where were you seeing the biggest issues? What were the things that you dreaded the most? Things that kind of made your day not go the way you'd like it to. And one of those questions was, which infrastructure security tasks do you dread the most, if any? And the responses we got were similar to what we expected, right? Vulnerability remediation is problematic. Patch management is problematic. Compliance audits. If you roll back, if you've been coming to SaltConf for a few years, 2 years ago, I gave a talk, a keynote presentation called Compliance Hell. And it was all about the fact that compliance audit is so problematic, right? You've got multiple teams that are talking or working on it. You've got multiple requirements. And by the time you get something fixed on one end, something else is broken. And you just get stuck in this loop because it took so long to get anything done. And even today, we're 24 months further down the road from that. And this is still the biggest complaint that customers have, is just these compliance audits take so much time. And really people feel like they aren't in control of being successful with those. And then we've got configuration management and just continuous compliance as being the other ones. Now, the reason we highlight this is if we roll up the things that I've bolded there, those are all parts and pieces that SaltStack SecOps can help with, right? We can help you identify the vulnerabilities that are in your systems. We can help you remediate those in an automated fashion. We can take what used to take days and take it down to minutes to go from identification all the way to fix. Of course, we can work on configuration management. We can help you with config drift. That actually falls a little bit more into the traditional SaltStack world. But what this all comes down to when you fix these issues with compliance audits and patch management, vulnerability remediation, configuration issues, it gets you to a point where you've got this true continuous compliance cycle and continuous compliance enforcement. And that's kind of the dream goal, if you will, that most of these companies are working towards. And from my perspective, that we've got to get to as an industry for us to be successful in keeping up with the pace of change in technology. So with that, as we looked at this, what we saw was not only is this a pain for the individual people who are working on it, but it's also a pain for the companies, right? And to get, of course, to the solution for a company, normally what they look at is how can I spend money to solve this problem? And over the last decade, we've seen companies going out to security vendors to try to solve this. And it always starts out the same way. They're going to spend some money to get a tool that helps them define their policies. Once those are in place, they're going to scan, identify where there's an issue, and then prioritize those issues. And once they've got that ranked, 1 to 10, 1 to 100, 1 to 1,000, whatever that list might be, they then are going to go in and analyze, because the reality is you can't fix 1,000 things. But they're going to go in and now they'll start to use AI. They'll use whatever tools they need to come up with a recommendation. And at the end, they're going to get to this crystallized number of 10 or 50 items that the IT operations teams are going to go out and fix. And so at that point, they turn around and they say, let's go fix this. And they created an IT service ticket in Jira or whatever ticket system that you want. And that is the culmination of all this money spent. It's not that the item gets fixed. It's not that there's a guarantee that it'll be fixed in a certain amount of time. It's just that now there's a ticket sitting out there that some poor IT team's got to work through to possibly get it to the state you want. And once you've got that, then you fall back into the scan stage and start to do this all over again. And it's really, from our perspective, from a SaltStack perspective, kind of a huge waste of money, and even more a huge waste of time. Because if we jump back to that survey, the teams don't enjoy doing this kind of work. It's not what makes them excited. It's not what makes them happy. And so you've got the cost in revenue from spending money with these security vendors, and a cost of turnover of people not being satisfied with their job. Because ultimately everybody feels like Beetlejuice, right? I got the ticket. I'm sitting here waiting. I don't know when it's going to come up, but it's going to be a long time. And I felt like Beetlejuice clip was very kind of apropos, given that we're 2 days before Halloween. So I hope everybody enjoys the Beetlejuice reference there. The other question, and there were a lot of questions. If you want to go back, you can get the full survey from our website. But the other question we asked was, how much do you agree or disagree that it's possible to become 100% compliant with some of these baseline standards, right? And that whether we use CIS as the example, just because it seems like most of our customer base looks at CIS, but there's also STIG, there's also common criteria, there's the guidelines from NIST and ISO as well. And what we saw was that a lot of people feel like this is an impossible task, right? Not just because they may be hard to define, but just because it's this constantly evolving world. And without any type of automation, it's incredibly difficult to stay at the baseline status that you expect. But what's interesting from a SaltStack perspective is that this really comes back to a discussion of configuration drift. If we were to ask those same IT operations people, how easy is it to keep your machines in the proper state? They'd be able to look at a number of configuration tools. We'd prefer they're looking at SaltStack and say, well, I can set up a state file. I can set up a beacon and reactor so that when that machine moves out of that state, I automatically call it and put it right back in the state that it's expected. And so they'd view that as being much more likely. But the reality is, if you look at CIS, if you look at DISA-STIG, if you look at these standards from an operations standpoint, it really is just a configuration drift problem. You have to define what you want to be compliant with, which we can do with our state files. And then you have to make sure that those machines stay in the proper state, which you can do through a schedule, or you can do through some type of automation like a beacon and reactor. And so as we see this, we see that there's almost 50% of the people who are saying this is a huge task, almost impossible. But SaltStack's a tool that can come in and make it much easier to kind of make this a possibility within your organization. Now I'm looking at our numbers and seeing that we're still at only about 30 people. So I don't know if my sample size here is going to be enough to get a truly valid notion here. But if you got time, if you got your cell phone next to you and you're in the US, please take the opportunity to do a little poll here. So if you just text to this number, the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, based off of your specific uses sorry, I should back up and tell you what the question is. So the question that I'd like to know here is, does your company adhere to a specific baseline security standard? And if so, which one? Is it CIS, the Center for Internet Security? Is it DISA-STIG? Is it common criteria, et cetera? I'll actually pop it into the chat as well. Just, I see Ryan jumping into that, but I've got it. I can do it much quicker, I think. Let me just get the text looking right. Oh, sorry, it looks a little bit ugly there. But yeah, if you can go ahead and send that, and then as we go through the discussion today, at the end of it, I'll pop up the results, and we'll see kind of which ones are the most. And if you're overseas, or if the number doesn't work for you, you can pop it in here like Mark did, and we can get a sense of the online piece of it too, just because there aren't so many here that we can't count them up to add them to our poll. So again, I appreciate the participation in that. So what this comes down to is, okay, that's great. So how can SaltStack make this easier for us? And so what I'd like to spend the rest of the time in today is actually walking through a demonstration, right? A demonstration of how to use SaltStack Comply, which focuses in on compliance with things like Center for Internet Security and DISA-STIG, and how we can use SaltStack Enterprise SecOps Protect to do things like vulnerability remediation. Now, one of the things that we like to do as we go through this demonstration is use two different personas, because the reality that we've seen from our customers is that this is a job that's done not by a single group, but today it's done by two different groups working together, right? So we have Skyler, who is our security analyst. Her job is to make sure that all the systems at our fictitious company called Salgado, all those systems are secure, right? And that they adhere to the policies and procedures that the business expects, and that regardless of whether machines are coming online or offline, they're always in the state that we would want them to be. Now, her biggest pain point is the fact that she already can find most of these things. She knows, she knows that there's vulnerabilities. She knows that systems have drifted out of compliance. She even knows that new machines that are coming online from any of the cloud providers are wildly out of compliance with something like CIS. But she's not able to fix those, because the fixing and the action is actually in the purview of the IT operations team. And so that's where we see Ivan, an IT administrator, whose job is to keep those systems up and running. And now, like I mentioned before, he's getting more and more requests from Skyler and her team saying, hey, these machines have got to be compliant, right? If you just got a machine that's up and running that's not compliant, then you've just got a persistent hole in our security, and that's a problem. Now, his issue is similar to Skyler. How do I go about fixing these things? How do I go about staying ahead of the curve and ahead of the requests that are coming in from this team and from this group? So let me just walk through what you're going to see, right? Keep an eye out, if you will. First off, you're going to see role-based access control. Skyler can see things that Ivan can't see, and Ivan will see things that Skyler can't see. And more importantly, each one can take different actions based off the requirements of their job role. Next, you're going to see that we'll be able to identify where there's issues and where the power of Salt really comes in, because you're probably able to say, hey, here's a bunch of vendors that can identify the issues. But what's powerful about SaltStack is we can bring the remediation at what I call the power of Salt, right? And so regardless of the size of your environment, regardless of how many minions you're managing, at the click of a button and a few seconds or minutes later, you can have those vulnerabilities remediated. And that's what I believe, from a product standpoint, truly differentiates SaltStack from everybody else in the market. Now, we're starting to see more and more of these configuration players try to move into this space. But of course, SaltStack moved into this space 2 years ago, right? We've got a 24-month head start. So we've built content, we've built workflows, we've built additional automation that allows us to take advantage of that head start within the product. So with that, let me jump over. I guess one thing I can do, I can stop really quick and ask if there's any questions. I haven't seen any in the chat, but if there's any questions on the slide material before I jump into the demo, I'd be happy to answer them now. Okay, I'll assume I didn't miss anything. So for those of you who aren't familiar with SaltStack Enterprise, this is what SaltStack Enterprise looks like today. Like I mentioned before, I'm going to log in first as Ivan, just to give you a sense of, we'll do a map walkthrough, if you will, right? And then we'll go back and run this through as different users. So the first screen you see as a user here is what we call our targets page or our all minions page. And what this is just a list of all the minions in your environment. And so in this case, I've got 13 minions. From here, I can run pre-built jobs. So I can run a test ping, which is just going to reach out to each one of these and say, hey, are you there? And it's going to come back and say yes or no, yes or no. The next thing you can do is you can start to drill down into different targets. So in this case, I've created a target that's got a single minion that runs in AWS. I've got a couple more that are based off of data centers. So I've got East, Central, West. I've got a few others that are based off of operating systems. So I've got like my Windows servers. If there's a specific patch that I need to run on Windows, I can do that, or a specific job, I can do that. Next to that, we've got what we call our activities tab, which just shows me what's been run, and I can drill in. So example, here's that test ping that we ran a few seconds ago. And I can drill in and see the results. It's not going to be too exciting since it's a test ping, but I can see, hey, all those came back in this case, and here they are listed out. I can get into the raw information if I really want to get into the kind of the JSON blob, or I can see some high-level information. So this is everything we expected to return, or everything that we expected. This is what returned. I could go in and start to drill down on anything specific if I was looking for a specific window to see what was going on. Just a sec, I'm seeing a couple questions. Can I minimize the chat window? Did that help? Guess I can't ask now that I minimized the chat window. I can take my camera off as well. I don't know if that helped either. So this is just kind of the activity view. The other part of the activity view is what we call in progress. And right now I don't have anything in progress, but it also shows me everything that's scheduled. And so I've got a set of jobs that are running on my East data center that are running, it looks like every day, right? And so this just tells me what's upcoming. And from here I can skip, or I can unskip, or I could remove. The other elements that are worthwhile of noting are what we call elements. So we've got all the jobs that are listed here, and I could create new jobs. We've got schedules that you can define, and then you've got pillar and file server. And so if you're needing to build your files or attach pillar, you can do that from the GUI here. And then of course you can just go through and start to traverse this as you need. The last piece, and this is where we're going to spend most of our time, is going to be in this SecOps tab. And so I'll actually just quickly show, this is the compliance piece. And to differentiate the two, comply focuses on the baseline benchmarks from CIS, DISASTIG, and we plan to move into others in the future. And then the other piece that we have here is that we have vulnerability, which is our protect offering, which allows us to scan for known vulnerabilities across different operating systems and run their remediations there. So I'm going to go ahead and log in now as our security user, and we'll go through kind of a day of the life experience for both Skyler as well as Ivan. All right, so as you can see, when I log in as Skyler, she's got purview over a smaller set of minions. If you look, what she really has is a set of data center minions and then an AWS minion. So all those that are maybe in test or in development are areas where she's focused her time. And so she's only seeing the ones that are assigned to her. So this is that role-based access control coming in. If we jump over to the SecOps tab, one of the first things that she sees, one of the first things I'd like to point out is the fact that when we spin up an image, and so this was just an image that was spun up yesterday, out of the box, straight out of AWS. And I use AWS just because that's where my environment is, but it's the exact same if I do this on Azure, GCP, or anywhere else. Out of the box, most of these images are already 52% non-compliant with the CIS benchmark. And for most security people, that's pretty concerning, right? That means that there's, in this case, 122 opportunities for some bad actor to take advantage of my system. And of course, that is what keeps Skyler up at night. How do I take these 122 checks? And I can jump in here. We can look at these checks, right? So let's take a look. The first check that's non-compliant is this audit SGID executables, which I may or may not understand quite what that means. And so I can click into that, and I can quickly see what that is, right? I can see a description. I can see kind of a more layman's term description. And the most important part from Ivan's perspective as we get into his work is I've got a state file here that's going to tell me exactly what I'm looking for, and then exactly what's going to happen when I remediate that, right? It also keeps track then of all the different times that we've assessed. And in this case, I haven't remediated anything, but it would also show me any time that's been remediated. And so it gives Skyler the ability to understand and drill into these different areas. She can, of course, sort based off of compliance or non-compliance to get an understanding there. And of course, there's just kind of the quick report that's available. Now, of course, like we mentioned before, her main task is how do I go in and how do I make sure that I can keep these things in a proper state? So let's just show you how quick and easy it is for Skyler and her team to run an assessment, and then how easy it is to hand that off to the team that actually takes action and have everybody on the same page, on the same report, moving towards the same goal, rather than working across kind of different tools and different timelines. So we'll go ahead and create a new policy. We'll call it the weekly West DC scan. And as you can imagine, we're going to go ahead and select the West data center. So this West data center actually has 2 minions in it. And in this case, it's running CentOS 7. All right. And so you can see here the list of benchmarks. Mostly at this point in time, it's operating systems. So your most common operating systems across CIS. And we've got DISA-STIGs for RHEL 7. And we're working on STIG for Windows and RHEL 8 and CentOS 8 in the coming quarter. But you can see that there's a number of different benchmarks that are available. Within each benchmark, that's my problem. Within each benchmark, sorry, I've got a filter in here. Within each benchmark, there's the various checks. So for most of these benchmarks, what we see is there's 220 to 300 different checks. And so SaltStack's gone in and defined each one of those. And like I showed you earlier, when we drill into on the assessment side, we can also drill into the creation side. And it gives me that same information, right? What's the description that comes from CIS? What other operating systems does this adhere to? Which references does this go to as far as other CIS benchmarks in this case? And how does it reference to like ISO 800 and where it can kind of cross-reference into those other areas.
Alex,
just like we saw,
a couple questions have come in the chat. Okay. Question about what is the AWS benchmark? I think it might have flashed up on your screen. I think they're asking for like, would that be a flavor of Linux or what would that be?
Yeah, sure. So in that case, it was just another CentOS machine. And so that was just a CentOS machine that I spun up yesterday and then ran the entire benchmark again. So all 220 checks. And then it was just the output from that. And so I haven't gone in and done any remediation. That is just kind of your basic out of the library CentOS machine from AWS. So if you're spinning up CentOS machines in your environment, they're currently 57% non-compliant with CIS.
Apologies that you did answer that earlier, but Jesse also has another question. Can it use the minion data to run the platform specific benchmark, or do you have to break those out? You see Jesse's question.
Yeah, I'll go in and take a look at it. Can it use the minion data to run the platform-specific benchmark? You have to break those out. Let me just repeat that in the way I'm understanding it, and we'll make sure that we're both thinking of the same question. So, is the question that can it run? Yeah. So you'll have to select which specific benchmark you want to run. So if you've got a Windows machine, you've got to explicitly click the Windows version that you're going to run. That's a little bit different when we get to the protect stuff, where you can run, a group of minions that are different OSs, and each minion will dictate which vulnerability database to compare itself against. On the comply side, it's a little bit different because what we found is that not all users want to run all checks against those minions. And so what we'll see is and I'll show you this in a minute, we can customize these policies on the comply side. So that means that you've got to be OS specific, and you have to select which benchmark you want to start from. Yep. So at this point, we've selected the CentOS 7 benchmark. And like I said, there's these 220 checks. I'm going to go ahead and create just a slightly smaller policy. So in this case, I'll select a bunch from anything that says cron. We'll select a few things from SSH, if I can spell. And that just gives us about 20 or so checks that we've got selected. Yeah, we'll go ahead and keep this a little bit lighter. So once I've got that, then I go ahead and I click next. And based off those selections, and again, it can be anything from 2 or 3 checks up to the whole 220, 300 checks. Now within that, there's certain checks that have variables. And so what that means is maybe I want to change a user. The most common one actually ends up being, do you want to increase or decrease your timeout window, right? And so we give you this opportunity on some of those checks to come in and make some adjustments. And then you can come in and schedule it. And so if, in this case, if you remember, we said, hey, this is going to be a weekly scan. So I want to run this on Saturday. We'll have it Saturday at 11:45. So that's going to go ahead and run this on that weekly cadence as Skyler expects. And so I'm going to go ahead and save this. And you can see now we've got these 22 checks. I'm going to run this first assessment. Now, what's great about the SaltStack SecOps suite is we leverage the power of SaltStack that we all know and love. And so when I click Run Remediation, what we're really doing is we're taking this job, which is a policy assessment job, and we're passing it up to SaltStack Enterprise, who will then disseminate that out to the masters that need it, who will then disseminate that out to the minions that are going to run it. And so in this case, we've only got the 2 minions that are going to execute this job and start to pass it back up. But of course, since this is an add-on to SaltStack Enterprise, it just leverages that infrastructure that you've already got. So if you're a Salt Open user and you want SaltStack Enterprise, you simply have to install SaltStack Enterprise on top of your existing open infrastructure, and SecOps can be enabled within the GUI, and then you're off and running. And so you can see we've already got our response here, where we can see that we've got 16 non-compliant items and 6 compliant items. And as you can imagine, that's not quite the type of report that Skyler likes to see, right? At this point, she's got some concerns. She's thinking, hey, there's 73% of these checks that are not in the state that I want. So she can look at this in a couple different ways. She can go to the checks like we looked at earlier and see by check which ones are compliant or non-compliant. She could look at this from a minion standpoint and say, well, maybe, just maybe there's a new machine that came online that's not compliant, but in this case, they're pretty much the same, again, because I spun this up yesterday. Now, the next thing, of course, that she wants to do is go in and remediate. And so if you can see, I can check here and go to the remediate button, but since she's a security user, she doesn't have actually the permissions to take an action on the machine. Because of course, the last thing you'd want to have happen is everybody willy-nilly going out there and remediating things, and these machines getting into a bad state, right? If we think back to the concerns that an operations team have, one of those is everything's got to be secure and compliant. The second one is you can't break anything. And if everybody's taking action on machines, it's not going to be long until something breaks. And so we don't have Skyler having that permission. If you're in a small company, maybe it's the same person that does the scans and does the remediations. It's really easy to just check a box on the permissions that says, let Skyler run the remediations as well. But in Salgado, our made-up company here, it's a little bit bigger. So we do have the operations team that will go out and run the next piece with. And so I'm now going to log in as Ivan. And you'll see one of the things that's really important with SecOps from a SaltStack perspective is that Ivan and Skyler are seeing the exact same workflow, right? Skyler has access to the AWS benchmark target. So does Ivan, so he can see that benchmark. But most importantly, he can also see this new scan. And so Skyler can reach out and say, hey, Ivan, I just ran this scan. We've got a couple new machines. We're in a not good state. Can we go ahead and get those remediated? And so Ivan can come in, he can review those, he can drill into these different checks like we did earlier to get an understanding, to review maybe the state file and make sure he's comfortable with what's going to run there. And once he is, he can go ahead and select which ones he wants to remediate. And then he's just going to hit remediate all. And so I'm going to go ahead and remediate this set of 16, or I guess it's 16 divided by 2. So we got 8 non-compliant checks across these 2 machines. Now what we did is just like we did with the scan. We're going to kick off a job. Now we've got a remediate job that's gone out. We're calling down to these 2 machines, and it's going to run that. And it normally takes about 1.5 to 2 minutes. So while that's happening, I'm going to jump over and just kind of do a quick introduction and flyby of the vulnerability management piece. And then we'll come back and we'll do kind of the Betty Crocker, take the cake out all cooked of the compliance piece. So just like Skyler would have been able to trigger a scan for compliance, she can also trigger a scan for what we call our protect capabilities. And so in this case, we're actually looking at the East Data Center. So it's a little bit different. We can click in here and see that this is also a CentOS machine. We'll jump back and go into the vulnerability. And we can see that when that was triggered, we came up with a significant number of vulnerabilities. And so in this case, all that we're doing is we're going out and collecting, in this case, the the vulnerabilities that are known for the CentOS operating system. We're putting that into our vulnerability database. And then, like was asked earlier, based off the operating system, we know of the minion, we know which set of vulnerabilities to check against. So in this case, we're checking against all the CentOS vulns. We've got the advisory that we can drill in. We've got the information on that. And then we've got the CVSS score so that you can filter and sort. But what's important is, just like with comply, for me to fix this, all I got to do is select a few things and hit remediate. And that'll allow me then to remediate these issues within this particular machine. So again, we'll kick that off. Oh, looks like I've got a little problem there, which I won't troubleshoot now. But there's the other part of this particular portion is that we can import data from other scanning tools. So we understand that SaltStack's just one player in the security space. And so we've worked with Tenable, Qualys, Rapid7, and Kena Security to allow you, if you're already working with Nessus, for example, to be able to import that data. We've got integrations for Nessus that are API driven. For the rest of these today, those have to be file driven. So you just upload the file of your results from Rapid7, and then you get the same kind of assessment view of what was scanned and what is vulnerable that you would then be able to remediate. And then if we work this through kind of a closed loop, what we see is you import that information from Nessus, you run your vulnerability remediations, and then you can trigger an event that goes back to Nessus that says, hey, we're done with our side, why don't you rescan that? And of course, the goal is that we get to a clean scan, if you will. And we view this as kind of two sides of the same coin. On one side, we have the baseline CIS security components that we saw on the comply side. And then, of course, we've got the vulnerability and patching capabilities on the protect side. So let me jump back over to comply. Uh-oh. The spinning umbrella of death.
While you're waiting, Alex, there have been a few questions about the so non-agent or non-minion things. Does it have to have a minion on it to run a check against it?
Yes, today it is agent-based. So we started out with agent-based capabilities. Of course, SaltStack has Salt SSH, and we want to grow into that over the coming year to enable you to have that Salt SSH or that agentless piece. One of the other things that's going on with that, one of the reasons that's been a little bit slower, if you go to any of the open office hours or the open innovations, there's some work being done on our SSH or our agentless options. And we want to take advantage of the new stuff that's supposed to come out next spring rather than build it on Salt SSH on the older stuff and then have to upgrade. And so we're just waiting for some of those innovation works to kind of finalize and then understand which will be the best path to go forward from an agentless standpoint.
Another question, could you just quickly summarize the difference between the comply side of checking versus the protect side of checking?
Yep.
One has CVEs, the other, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so the comply side is focused really on secure configurations, right? So we look at Center for Internet Security, we look at DISASTIG, we look at NIST that define what these baselines should look like, right? They say this port should be open, this user should be in a certain group, this file should be in a certain place. And for all intents and purposes, that is just a definition of a configuration for a machine. And that's what comply focuses in on. We do a scan on the configuration of that machine against a benchmark like Center for Internet Security, where we see discrepancies. You can hit remediation and it's going to put it back in line with that baseline configuration. The protect side of it is really looking at CVEs and declared vulnerabilities from the operating system vendors today, and of course other software package vendors in the future as we move beyond just operating systems into packaged applications. And so that's going to be all the things that are defined in MITRE, all your vulnerabilities that are announced on Patch Tuesday if you're using Windows, and those types of things.
And more questions about routers and switches and stuff. I think you've already answered them, but
yeah, and so one of the things I'll just point out is that we've started with operating systems because that was the closest to our core competency from a SaltStack standpoint, and that was of course where most of our users were focused. One of the things that we see is, of course, this has got a huge opportunity for us to expand into other areas. And so, like I said, we've started with the configurations and vulnerabilities for operating systems. The next horizons that we see, or areas where we see great opportunity, are packaged applications, network devices, because there's network device configurations for CIS, databases, which kind of falls in the packaged software. But those are all areas that we can expand into. And not to get too much into the VMware side of things right now, but one of the things that makes me most excited from a product manager standpoint is I can sit where I'm at and see these opportunities and see the opportunity for SaltStack and SecOps to push into those areas. And from a month ago, that was kind of hard to do with the size of team that we had. But from where I stand today, and I'm having discussions with NSX, with vSphere, with vCloud, those are areas that now are starting to open up to us because there's additional weight and there's additional excitement behind it that'll help us drive that opportunity, and should also bring additional resources and interest that can help us get to those places faster, because definitely that's where we want to end up. We want to be able to run these same scans for comply and protect against your packaged applications, so that that not only the OS is good, but also your Active Directory instance is properly configured based off of the baselines. We want to make sure that you can do that with your Cisco devices as we get these network minions in place. And so that gives us the opportunity to start to push into those new areas.
Sounds like if people are looking for something that SecOps doesn't quite cover yet, let us know so we can help prioritize it against the roadmap.
Yep, let us know. There's two parts to that. One is let us know. The second part is you can also import your own checks. And so right now I'm showing you everything that's out of the box. And of course, that's where you want to be, is have this stuff out of the box and tested and validated and certified by us and by our partners at somewhere like Center for Net Security. But if something's not done that you would like to have working from something like Comply, you can actually build your own checks, include them in your policies, and then run and remediate based off of your custom work. So let me just quickly kind of tie off on the demo here. So the last thing we did on the Comply side was we ran a remediation. So I can jump back here and you'll see that we ran the remediation. Both of them have come back. So now I'm going to run a second assessment. And just like before, this is going to go in and it's going to start to run. So at this point, we know that it's running. We don't have any results for it yet. It's queued up in the system. Let's actually see if we can jump out there and catch it in the in progress. Nope, it's already gone over, it looks like. So there's our ad hoc job. So if we come back now, we should be able to come in and track this. And slowing down a little bit. We'll give it a second. But what ultimately we'll see is, like before, where it took about a minute for it to run an assessment, we're again going out, SSE passing down to the master passing down to the minions, and the minions will return the same data. And what we'd expect, and what of course we normally see, what I normally see when I'm doing this not live in a demo, is that it'll come back all green, which is the expectation that we have. And so there we go. We gave it enough time with me tap dancing around to get that to where all those checks have now run, and we can see that they're all in a compliant state. And so from Ivan's standpoint, what would have taken potentially hours of going out to each one of these, I think there were 8 different checks that were non-compliant, building a script, maintaining that script, running it against his systems, he can now do with the click of a button and get back to Skyler and say, hey, your scan earlier is now compliant. We've gone from 73% non-compliant to 100% compliant. Let me know if something goes wrong or if you've got any new machines that come up that give you any problems. And of course, that's really closing that loop of time that it takes for these teams to, collaborate because they're using one tool, they're using one record of truth, if you will. And then, of course, because SaltStack is an automation tool and we can execute these jobs instead of just informing manual task doers to go out and do it, we can significantly reduce the cost of taking action and keeping these machines in proper state. And of course, like we saw earlier, I've set this up now to run every week. And so the next assessment, in this case, will run in a week. So if we come in on Monday, or Skyler comes in on Monday and sees that something has drifted, we can go ahead and run another remediation. The other side of this too is if you want to do a little bit of custom work, you can have that remediation, if anything pops red, to trigger an alert or an event that can then remediate based off of our beacon and reactor system. Of course, that today is a little bit of manual work, but over time we want to make that so that it's more and more out of the box and in the GUI and through the components that are available to the team. So that kind of wraps up the demo. Are there any additional questions before I kind of finish off the slide presentation part?
Real quick, Alex, just to be clear, question. So the CVEs are all built in and provided, right, on a regular basis on the Protect side?
That's right. We do I don't have the developers on with me right now, but I think we do a daily scrape on the CVE databases for all the different operating systems, and those get published out once a week, and we're working to make that quicker and quicker, right? We're moving towards getting that to be an almost real-time update every evening, so that you've got the latest vulnerability database.
Close out your slides and then read through some of these questions at the bottom of the chat.
Okay. So just a couple quick slides to let you know where we're going, right? So we've shown you what's in the product today. From a compliance standpoint, this is all about driving more content, right? So currently under development, we've focused in on CIS, quickly looking at our results from the, I'll pull it up here. Quickly looking at our results from our quiz earlier, it looks like we need to spend more time on DISA-STIG and starting to look at more on the NIST side. So basically, looks like you guys are all, or your teams are all starting to look more and more at federal spaces and spaces that mandate those federally driven technologies. And so what we've got currently under development is on the CIS side of kind of rounding out that piece. And then it's good to see that in that next quarter, we really start to hit hard into DISA-STIG. I mentioned earlier that today we've got STIG for REL 8. Which gave us a lot of learnings, a lot of things that we needed to understand as we look to automate more and more of the content development. But that'll be what starts to be our focus in the beginning of next year. Now, the other piece that's worth looking at is one of the areas that's ongoing for us is how do we increase the automation of this baseline content creation, right? And so we're building an internal project that allows us to consume both CIS and STIG definitions, and then be able to output those so that we can reduce our time from, it normally takes us about 2 months to build out, for example, CIS for SLES. We want to get that down to taking us days or weeks through being able to automate as much of this as possible through kind of repeating patterns that we see in both the CIS and STIG definitions. On the Protect side, what's worth noting is today, the operating systems we work for are really the predominant Linux systems. What will be released in the beginning of next year is Windows Protect. And so we've gone ahead, we're at a point where that is largely done. We're just putting on the finishing touches. My hope and goal would be that we've got a beta that would be available before December, so in the next month and a half. And then that would become productized and part of SaltStack Protect in that next release at the beginning of the year. The other areas that we're focused in on are how can we do post-remediation actions. So as I'm sure many of you know, sometimes, especially with Windows, there's a need to reboot a machine after the package has been installed. And so we're going to go ahead and allow that. And so within that piece where we go in and we say remediate, it'll come up with the items that need a post-remediation action, and you can check those and then either schedule those to happen at a time later when things are kind of in a maintenance window, or be able to reboot those things or take another action immediately. And then the last piece on the Protect side is there's some cases where maybe you want to do something more in depth than just simply doing the updated package that came from the vendor. And so you'll be able to attach a state file to specific advisories and say, this is actually what I'd like to have run when we have this particular vulnerability identified. And so then you'd be able to attach that state file, and then every time in the future when you run into that same place, that same vulnerability, you'd be able to run this custom script that you'd built and applied to SaltStack. So with that, it looks like there are quite a few questions. I'm trying to see where we left off.
So the one from Jesse, I'm not sure I've fully answered it. I want to make sure that he's really clear on his end. He's worried that some of the remediation scripts he'd have to write himself, but if it's content that we sell, all the remediation is done on the back end with content that we've created based on the benchmarks.
Correct. On the comply side, all the remediations are provided out of the box for Center for Internet Security. And one of the reasons we've doubled down on them early on is they partner with us, and then they will certify that content for us. Whereas DISA-STIG and NIST, they don't have that in place to do that type of certification. At least they didn't a year ago when we were really digging in with those two. And so yeah, that content for identification and remediation on comply is provided with SaltStack with the purchase.
Cool. Yeah, I think that helps. And Casey has a question. Can the CVEs be synced offline?
Yes, they can. There's a way to kind of set the sync, and then you can also pull a package down and upload it if you're air gapped.
Cool. Micah has a question. He says, is it possible to create your own benchmark for, say, a third-party software or something like that?
Yes, it is. You're able to do that with custom checks, and in that same way that you can upload kind of the offline content, we've got an SDK that allows you to kind of helps you build that content that you want for your custom check, and then you can upload that, and you can select it. Once it's uploaded into the GUI, you can select it in line with other policies that you're creating.
Patrick's wondering if you can undo remediation, and I suggested that no, you'd probably want to test it first on a dev box or something.
That's right. You definitely want to validate and test all these beforehand, just like you would any other update that you're going to do. The nice thing is that what we find is a lot of these things end up being repeating patterns. And so once you've tested it once and you start to see the same thing come up over and over again, you've got heightened confidence to know that it's going to work out fine, and you can be more kind of aggressive in there. But yeah, there's no magic rollback button, just like there isn't with any of the other execution modules within SaltStack. And so we do recommend a kind of test and validation process from non-prod into prod.
And back to Jesse's question, he was talking about on the vulnerability side for CVEs. Do we write the patches, or do they have to code their own states on those?
So it depends on the vulnerability that's found. So on most of the vulnerabilities, we provide the remediations that are available, and we can execute those. But there are certain ones that are not straightforward, or that we kind of want to avoid because we don't want to take a certain action on your machine. And that's where we get into that custom remediation piece, right? And so especially if you're using something like Nessus to do a scan, it'll come in and we will show you which ones we will remediate. And then there will be a set where we'll say we did not remediate these because we don't know how, or we're not going to mandate a certain way of doing it. And in that case, that's where you'd come in with these custom remediations, and you'd be able to provide your own state file that would execute the remediation there.
That's super helpful. How frequent is the sync for new CVEs, and how fast are the fixes available typically?
So it's a weekly sync on new CVEs on the product, on the Protect side, and the fixes are coming out with the new CVEs as those are updated.
Yeah. Alfonso asks, on top of the vulnerabilities, can we use the state high state as desired state instead of input custom benchmarks one by one?
Yeah, and I think that gets back into this customer remediation piece. So and like I said, this is forward looking. This is not currently in product, but one of the things that we're working to build for the spring, where you'd be able to take your high state, and that would become the remediation action that takes place for that particular advisory.
And can you point your vulnerability repository at like a custom Yum repo or a satellite repo?
Yeah, I don't think today you can. That's been a request that we've gotten a few times. I wouldn't be surprised if some of our engineering and SC counterparts have figured out a way around that. But that's definitely a request we've got. It's on the roadmap. It's a little bit further out to be able to point to an internal repo rather than the vendor-specific repo.
We are 1 minute away from out of time, and I think we've answered all the questions. So that was amazing rapid fire, both going through your slides, the demo, and the questions, Alex. So thanks so much. I think we'll actually get kicked off here in about 30 seconds. So,
all right. Well, thanks everybody for joining. It was great.
Yeah, good job, Alex, and thanks for your time, everyone.